So why doesn't she just go get help? She could go to call the police. She could get a protection order. She could even go to a domestic violence shelter. At this point, it's getting a little, she should just leave. There's places for her to go. I do research with domestic violence survivors, and often I'm having conversations with people who have very little understanding about how complex it is to actually survive, how difficult it is to actually survive. And I'm reminded of Tasha. When she entered into the research interview with me, she immediately began to describe how her husband had made it literally impossible to stay safe in her home. And she was doing everything possible to keep her child and herself safe. She kicked him out of the apartment, and as instructed by the police, she went to court to get a protection order. He continuously violated that order. He would drive and park in front of her house every night and then follow her to work every morning. You can imagine when she's at work, she's very nervous, very anxious. What is he gonna do? She decides she wants to quit her job, but then thinks, I can't afford to be without a paycheck. So she talks to her landlord, right? She sees if maybe he'll allow her to break the lease without having to pay the fee. She shows him the protection order, saying, look, this is critical. He refuses. Okay, how about I move to another unit in the complex? He refuses that too. She didn't have the money to break the lease, and there was no one in her social networks that could loan her that kind of cash. She also was really hesitant about pushing the issue, given how often she and her neighbors had called the police on her husband. You see, in some counties, when you call the police a certain number of times within a specific time frame, your property is labeled a nuisance, and landlords have the right to evict tenants that are causing a nuisance. And she could tell that the police were already over her anyway. They had told her, look, miss, if you aren't going to leave your husband and go to a shelter, then there's not really anything we can do for you. You two are legally married, and he has a right to be here because his name is on the lease. Okay. Tasha decides to then go to the courts to file for divorce so she can get his name off of the lease. The courts won't let her file divorce papers. Why? Because she needs her husband's signature, and he refuses to sign the papers. So, Tasha is caught in this experience. Her husband is not going to stop stalking her. Her landlord is not letting her move. The courts are not letting her get a divorce. And to be honest, she didn't really want to leave her home because it was one of the last affordable housing options in her area. And her daughter, 5 years old, was having such a time. She didn't want to pick her up and move her into a temporary shelter to further destabilize her. Tasha was caught in this web of instability and insecurity and stress and fear, which made it nearly impossible to try to stay safe. At the end of the interview, she plainly says to me, now I know why they say sometimes systems fail you, because they do. They don't ever listen. And this is where I come in. This is where my work starts. I'm a participatory researcher that co-generates evidence with survivors and community partners about how we can design responses that listen and that contribute to survivors' safety and well-being. One of the most significant findings in my qualitative and quantitative work is that when survivors are experiencing severe violence, they absolutely reach out. This is irrespective of race, irrespective of class, irrespective of gender. Right? The second most important finding from my collection of work is that if a survivor is a person of color, if they are trans, if they are queer, if they are poor, if they are unhoused, if they are someone who has a mental health condition, I am almost guaranteed to hear that they've had a significantly difficult time accessing resources. So when we think about these two things, people actively seeking out support and, depending on your identity status, you having a very difficult time getting the resources, I am reminded of how important it is to create community responses that are inclusive. And I think we can do that in 3 different ways. The first thing is to make sure that we can resource community networks. Survivors, in their moments of need, even before they reach out to the police, they're relying on you. Neighbors, parents, siblings, co-workers. All of you are their people, and they reach out to their people first. When we were talking to survivors about what do you need in this moment, what would be the most helpful thing for you? Someone who is compassionate, someone who picks up the phone and understands, someone who does not judge me. When they also said, it would be also really nice to have someone who understands my lived experience and maybe shares that with me. So talking to other survivors who understand how to navigate abusive partners and oppressive systems simultaneously. So my research team and I are developing a peer survivor advocacy program. Survivors supporting other survivors to generate more resources for their safety. The second thing that we need to do is to reduce the burden of proof. I recently completed a study with a group of community partners, and we looked at a housing system, a city-funded housing system. One of the most prevailing norms in that system is that survivors are often trying to scam the system. Okay? And what happens is that survivors then have to create more evidence to demonstrate that they were abused. So they had to find protection orders and police reports and eviction notices and bank statements, right, to demonstrate that they were not trying to overuse the system. But what if we build a system that actually trusted survivors? I evaluated an organization that did just that. They had 2 policies that were based on trusting survivors at their word and making it easy for them to be able to access services. The first policy was called a low barrier policy. What this meant is that the organization did whatever they could to screen survivors in, to reduce any of the barriers that typically come with accessing other services, and said, you're welcome here. This is where you can be. You don't even need to bring your ID if you don't have it. We believe you. The second policy is called a voluntary services policy. And this particular policy says, we can give you housing services and you don't have to do anything else you don't want to do while you're in this program, right? So what this means is we can house you and you don't have to come to the parenting group. We can house you and you don't have to meet with a caseworker, right? Survivors have choice to decide how they want to engage in the program, and it's not contingent on their ability to stay housed. And so 3, we really must focus on creating responses that center survivors' power. The focus of looking at and thinking about responses that allow for choice and freedom for people to decide what they want to do and how they want to do it without the burden of proof. Okay? One of the things that we found in our research is that the more choice that you give survivors in the response, the safer they are, the more empowered they feel. They feel strong, they feel confident, right? They want knowledge, they get resources, they're invested. These are the kinds of things that really create and enhance safety. So let's go back to Tasha. What if Tasha's neighbors came and instead of calling the police again, they knocked on her door? How can we support you, Tasha? This is what we're hearing. Do you need help putting up security cameras? Do you need us to walk you to your car? Do you want to stay with us anytime something feels unsettled or unsafe? Would you like us to go with you to court? Would that be helpful to you? What if her workplace had a domestic violence policy that said that they would transfer people to other branches if necessary or needed? What if her housing complex had a domestic violence fund? So anytime people needed to transfer units or transfer to other buildings, they could do that without question. What I find is that in situations that feel really insurmountable and complex, and in times where systems are not effectively responding to what people need, community-based responses that are built on trusting survivors and increasing power is always the right path forward. Thank you.